Welcome to the study. I hope that you are comfortable this evening and ready for some beautiful sounds. Because here in the study, it's very, very peaceful and calm and tranquil, and no one will disturb us as we relax and listen to a story. The story of paper. As you can see, I have all kinds of paper here, and I will be making all of the nice paper sounds for you as we talk about the history of this fantastic material. You see, a basic human need that has always been with us as a species is the need to communicate. To convey our messages and ideas and feelings to each other and to posterity. To organize thoughts, to philosophize, to account for things, to exchange and share. This has been facilitated all in the last millennium by paper. Look at that. This one is birch bark, and it's making birch snow. Or I'll blow some off the paper. That's a nice sound too. It's like the kiss of a breeze. So as I clean this up, we will listen to the history and listen to some paper sounds. I have all kinds of paper here for you today. Beautiful silk papers, flower pressed papers, cellophane. We will learn how we make paper, or how paper is made, the different uses that paper can have, and what to do with it in future. So as I regale you with these beautiful sounds, we'll also have the story of paper, and you, my friend, can rest back comfortably and float off on a sheet of your own to beautiful dreams. much the same way that social media, the internet, television, and radio brought about revolutions in human interaction and engagement, it can be said that one thing became, in its way, the catalyst for all of these developments. It was the invention of paper that truly revolutionized human civilization. In the words of the Terchani Children's Encyclopedia, it is a material essential for spreading ideas in everyday life. Over the centuries, paper has made an enormous contribution to progress, from enabling citizen participation in democratic life to raising levels of knowledge and education. Even in today's world of electronic mail, media memes, and text messaging, PDFs and e-journals, we still use paper for everything from newspapers and books to things like medical and even building supplies. The history of paper has mirrored, recorded, and attested to the evolution of human society over the millennia. From the media of scientific and philosophical knowledge to the spread of education, right up to the creation of the kind of political and historical consciousness which gave birth to the modern nation-state. Until the late Bronze Age, communications were put on lightweight, durable media, easily transportable, such as clay, tablets, silk, wood, stone, leather, sticks, bones, even feathers, and wax tablets, as well as papyrus, the ancient Egyptian writing material, whence we get the name of paper, which was woven from the stems of the papyrus plant and being produced in Egypt and Greece as early as 3000 BC. Later parchments made from animal skin were also used. The origins of standardized, mass-produced paper, though, can be traced to 2nd century AD in China. It was Cai Lun, a Chinese court official of the Han Dynasty, who documented the first modern method of papermaking in China. He made the paper by mixing rags, tree bark, and fishing nets with water, mashing it flat, and pressing out the water, and drying it in the sun. The secret of papermaking was closely guarded for many centuries until, in the 6th century, the invention was brought to Japan by a Buddhist monk. Right away, the Japanese learned the papermaking techniques and began to use pulp derived from finely chopped mulberry bark to produce this precious material for themselves. Over time, Chinese papermakers experimented and produced a number of different types of paper, sized, coated, and dyed, developments which significantly helped China advance as a country. By the 10th century, the Chinese had introduced paper money to their monetary system. Long before Marco Polo traveled to the east, the Arab world discovered the secrets of papermaking in about AD 751, when the Governor-General of the Caliphate of Baghdad captured 2 Chinese papermakers in the Silk Road textile center, Samarkand. With their help, he founded a paper mill there. Aided by the abundance of hemp and linen, 2 high-quality raw materials perfect for making paper, production spread across Asia, including to Baghdad and Damascus. The process the Arabs used involved garnetting and macerating rags in water to obtain a homogeneous pulp. This pulp was then sifted to separate the fibers from the water. What was left were sheets of pulp in the sieves. These were pressed, dried, and covered with a layer of rice starch to make them hold ink better. This technique also began to be employed in Egypt and North Africa as the idea spread. It wasn't until the 11th century Arab conquest of Sicily and Spain that paper arrived in Europe. Papyrus and parchment began to be replaced with this new material that was easier and, with the advent of the new production techniques, cheaper to make. However, the rice starch proved to be an attractive food source for insects, which meant that sheets of paper did not last. Paper soon acquired the reputation of being an inferior quality material compared to the parchment that was made with animal skin. And in 1221, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who had himself grown up in Sicily, prohibited the use of paper for public documents. Then, in the 12th century, the papermakers in Fabriano, a small town in Italy, began to produce the hemp and linen pulp paper with a new kind of equipment and production technique: hydraulic hammer mills, which macerated the rags and significantly reduced the time it took to produce pulp, and sheets were glued with gelatine, unpalatable to bugs and insects. In addition, these papermakers created different paper types and formats. The journey from rag to paper was a long and involved process, meant for experts and experienced papermakers. First, the rags had to be procured and sorted, from which the paper would be made. The rags that were used as raw material for papermaking in Europe during this period, raw flax and hemp fiber, were both naturally dark in color due to the encrusting plant material that remains attached to the fiber after its separation from the inner stalk of the plant. Producing a lighter colored fabric required time, considerable handiwork, and patience. Cloth was sorted into parcels of an equal fineness, steeped in water, or equal parts water and lye, from 36 to 48 hours. It was then taken out, rinsed, washed, and spread to dry. Then it was ready for bucking, using a mixture of boiled ashes and water, or the application of salts. Then the linens were immersed in lye for 3 or 4 hours. The cloth was then carried out early in the morning, spread on the grass, pinned, corded down, exposed to the sun and air, and it was watered often enough that it did not dry for the first 6 hours. This watering continued into the next day, after which it was taken up, dry again. This bucking and watering was performed from 10 to 16 times or more before the linen was fit for souring or the application of acids, which involved a large vat or vessel of buttermilk or sour milk, as to wet the first row of cloth, and then seep down to each subsequent row, turning and turning. Sours made with bran or rye meal and water were often used instead of milk. This souring and layering of linens continued until just before fermentation, which lasts 5 or 6 days. Then the cloth was taken out, rinsed, mill-washed, and delivered to be washed with soap and water. It was then carried outdoors to be bucked yet again. The lyes were gradually made stronger until the cloth became a uniform white, and no darkness or brown color appeared. From this bucking it goes to the watering again. Then it returns to the souring, milling, washing, bucking, and watering, over and over, alternately, until the cloth is whitened, at which time it is blued, starched, and dried. This process, including the field bleaching, required from 6 to 8 months to complete. This would produce a fine fabric for use in everything from clothing to soft furnishings. But not all rags that were used at the paper mill were of this white quality. Rough or off-white rags and waste materials such as old ropes, sails, and canvas would also end up in the sorting rooms of paper mills, and these would be used for tougher quality papers, such as wrapping and card. But rags of the finest quality that had come from the soft furnishings and fine clothing were used for making the best quality paper. Likely, these came from fabric that had undergone the longer process for making fine white fabric. These fabrics were certainly used, washed, and used again until they had become too weak to be serviceable, and were finally collected as rags and sold to the paper mill. These rags were sorted into fine, medium, and coarse fibered groups. The next step for the rags was fermentation, or retting, which made the paper uniform, binding, soft, and gave it weight. The pulp needed more time to be worked so that a proper consistency was achieved. The rettery was vaulted and protected from variation in temperature. Considerable skill and experience were required to evaluate the strength of the rag and the degree of retting required to produce fibers that would respond readily to stamping, yet yield an optimum quality sheet with minimum loss of fiber. Next came stamping or beating. There were separate troughs, each filled with 3 or 4 hammers, sometimes more. These hammers in each particular trough were faced with heads that were intended to accomplish a specific task. The first set of hammers was often shod with nails to cut the pieces of rag into smaller bits, a process referred to as breaking. Breaking stamper heads worked against a bedplate of cast or wrought iron. The rags and water circulated in the trough. The trough shape, hammerhead angle, hammer size, striking order of the heads, individual hammer lift distance, and the consistency of the stock in the trough were all taken into consideration, monitored and altered to improve the work. Measured amounts of rags were fed into the first trough a little at a time. Once the rags had been cut and separated into threads in the first trough, they were transferred by hand to the second trough. These hammers were fitted with more rounded, broad-headed nails designed to fray and separate the remaining bits of rag and threads into the individual cellulose fibers required for paper making. In the third trough, the faces of the hammers consisted of plain wood. Their purpose was to brush, loosen, or liquefy the pulp by freeing it of flocks. There were usually 6 troughs, 3 for breaking, 2 for beating, and 1 for brushing out. As beating progressed in the breaking and beating troughs, the fiber was being constantly washed with water. Clear water was fed into the troughs by a system of wooden channels, and the dirty water let out at the same rate through a horsehair net in the wall of the stamper trough. A good deal of water was made to pass through the fiber during the long breaking and beating periods required, rendering the fibers a lighter, whiter color. The addition of white pigment, such as ground limestone, chalk, or seashells, might also have been used as an additional lightening technique. All the washing also significantly reduced impurities, as well as microbes that might destroy the paper. Next came the actual sheet forming. A rectangular wooden frame covered with a woven brass wire surface was the mold. This sieve-like mold was fitted with an open wooden frame called a decal. Sheet forming involved 3 men: the vatman, couche or coucher, and layer. The mold and decal assembly was dipped into a vat of dilute pulp and brought up level and parallel to the surface of the vat by the vatman. He then skillfully shook the vat to make the pulp into a uniform consistency. Once the layer of pulp had coalesced on the surface of the mold, the vatman removed the decal and pushed the mold to the coucher or couche. The couche turned it upside down, pressed it with a rocking motion against a damp woolen felt, transferring the fresh sheet of paper, smooth and unwrinkled, to the surface of the felt. The empty mold went back to the vatman, who had already made another sheet. The couche covered the fresh sheet of paper with another damp felt, and the routine continued, building up a repeated post of fresh sheets interleaved with felts. While the vatman and couche were assembling the post, the layer was busy separating damp paper from felts in a previously made and pressed post. Once a fresh post of a given number of sheets was built up, action stopped at the vat, and all available hands were called to help with pressing. Large wooden presses with iron screws used to expel excess water were used to press the water from the post pile. The greater the pressure, the drier the paper would be, and the easier it would be for the layer to handle when it was stripped from the felt and restacked, without the felt in between, into what was called a pack. The task of the layer demanded skill and experience to avoid tearing the sheets as they are lifted from the felts. Exchanging or shuffling the sheets between the repeated pack pressings was seen as vital to a smooth and beautiful finish. After 4 or 5 alternating pressings and reorderings, the pressure growing stronger as the paper gained consistency, the leaves were then carried to the drying room. As he stacked the freshly made paper, the layer returned felts to the couche, allowing the couche and the vatman to continue with their work until the next post was built up. A skilled 3-person team could produce between 1,500 and 4,000 sheets a day. After pressing, the paper was taken to the lofts to dry. Groupings of 7 or 8 sheets called spurs were hung over horsehair ropes coated with beeswax. To prevent the spurs from separating into individual sheets during drying, the paper was hung so that the air coming into the loft flowed against the face of the paper and not against its edges. This ensured that it dried smooth and free from excess curling. Slow drying was considered essential to minimize cockling and subsequent problems with gelatine sizing. Gelatine surface sizing was part of what gave the distinctive quality to many early European handmade papers. Besides the cellulose fiber itself, there was typically more gelatine in historical European papers than any other ingredient. Old, well-worn rags were not especially strong after drying, so it was only with the final addition of gelatine that a supple, pliant, yet durable and long-lasting paper was obtained. Gelatine size allowed the papermaker to work with weakened, readily shortened fiber to gain a well-formed, economically produced waterleaf sheet. The starch sizing employed in the late 13th century began to be replaced by gelatine relatively quickly, and by the 1300s it was standard in Europe. Sizing work was occasionally contracted externally, or it became the responsibility of an in-house specialist. Preparation of the size involved boiling animal parts collected from tanners and butchers, such as pieces of hide, ears, cartilages, feet, tripes, the skins of small animals such as hares, rabbits, or eels, and the parings of leather dressers and parchment makers, and leather parings furnished by the tanner as well. not altogether unlike how gummy bears are made. These were boiled in water, releasing gelatin from the animal connective tissue. After boiling and standing to clarify, the size was strained and diluted further before use. Alum was also added to the sizing tub to slow the growth of microbes, increase the finished paper's resistance to liquids, and to help stabilize the solution at various temperatures and concentrations. This would take between 36 and 48 hours. Size was not made up until needed because of its tendency to spoil, and the size was always used as fresh as possible. The prepared sizing was added to a large kettle and heated to keep the size warm. Then spurs of about 50 sheets were plunged into the warm solution. The size-soaked spurs were added to the press until some 2,500 sheets had accumulated. Then the size was forced uniformly through the entire pile. The excess size that squeezed out flowed back into the kettle for reuse. The sized sheets were hung in the loft to dry as before. Great care was taken to ensure slow drying of the paper. After drying, the sheets were spread flat, stacked and placed in a dry press for 12 hours. When removed from the press, the paper was restacked and pressed again for another 12 hours before proceeding to the finishing steps. If a smooth surface was required, papers were glazed by a worker using a small stone. The paper was spread out on a tanned chamois or sheepskin, and the glazier passed a smooth stone over both sides of the paper. Writing papers were more likely to receive this treatment than printing papers. A smoother surface was required for the even action of the pen on the page than for the press. However, the strokes of the glazier's stone can sometimes be seen in printed book leaves. The process is sometimes referred to as burnishing or polishing. Later in the 16th century, this process was done mechanically. Many manuscript workshops, including the famous one in Mainz, produced volumes made to order for the growing middle class of Europe's cities on paper supplied from these mills. This easily transportable material spread through Europe like wildfire, enabling dissemination of all manner of information much more readily. Soon, other embellishments appeared on the scene. In addition to the mill innovations, the Fabriano papermakers are also credited with the invention of watermarking. This involved wires to make decorations on the paper that could be seen when the sheet was held up to the light. This allowed hallmarks, signatures, coats of arms, civic or ecclesiastical emblems, and any number of artistically crafted symbols to become part of the paper sheet itself. From the 14th century, papermaking had spread all over Europe, and at the end of the 15th century, with the invention of movable type printing, production burgeoned. From the synergy of these two developments, human society never looked back. Alexander Pope, one of the foremost members of London Society of Philosophers and playwrights, writers, authors, and minds of the Enlightenment era, was also a translator and satirist. He's considered one of the most prominent English poets of the 18th century, and ran with the group, including Dryden, in what was known as the Kit Kat Club, as well as Jonathan Swift, Thomas Parnell, John Arbuthnot, Jacob Tonson being the printer or bookseller. Pope published poetry, translations of Homer, and writing for publications such as The Guardian and The Spectator. From the publication of his poetry and criticisms and translations, he amassed considerable wealth. Among his publications were essays on criticism and political commentary, in addition to an opulent new edition of Shakespeare. His work is defined by his particular skill of satire and his spirit of the Georgian era. Amongst his works are the moral essays known as epistles. This one, the Epistle to Bathurst, was addressed to Alan Lord Bathurst, written around 1732 or 33, titled Of the Use of Riches. Here we see a passage about the advent in Britain of paper money. Once, we confess, beneath the patriot's cloak, from the cracked bag the dropping guinea spoke, and jingling down the back stairs told the crew, old Cato is as great a rogue as you. Blessed paper credit that advanced so high shall lend corruption lighter wings to fly. Gold, imped with this, may compass hardest things, may pocket states, or fetch or carry kings. A single leaf may waft an army o'er, or ship off senates to some distant shore. A leaf like sibyls scatter to and fro our fates and fortunes as the winds shall blow. When the Industrial Revolution took hold in the 18th century, a wealth of innovations occurred, enabling mass circulation newspapers to expand, as well as the first best-selling novels requiring vast quantities of cheap cellulose. By the mid-18th century, a new method of paper-making was introduced, which resulted in a smoother, more homogeneous paper stock called wove paper. Developed in England by James Watman around 1755, wove paper was produced by using a fine woven screen or mesh mold with less clearly defined constituents than the mold used for laid paper. This new method of paper production created stock with a more uniform texture and appearance, causing wove paper to surpass laid paper by the 19th century. Recognizing the visual and structural differences between laid and wove paper can be an important aspect of dating documents and works. Claude Louis Berthollet, a French chemist, invented the chemical bleaching of pulp in 1785. This produced the level of white paper that is widely used today. It's most likely that the French revolutionaries were the first to use this white paper. With this rise in technology and the quality of paper came an increase in demand. This led to a shortage in cotton rags, the key material in the process. So much so that laws and levies were introduced in an attempt to govern the trade of rags. In 1797, Louis-Nicolas Robert had created the first foudrinier machine, which was also able to produce a 60-centimeter long sheet. And by the 19th century, the industrial manufacture of paper had already begun. Paper-making technology in Europe advanced significantly throughout these 2 centuries, commensurate with the growing consumer base. More mechanical solutions were being introduced to replace hand and manual labor, such as Robert's flat-screen paper-making machine. Robert's design was further developed in England, and his invention became the core of the foudrinier machine, the basis for modern paper-making. As demand for paper-making rags outstripped supply, alternative methods were sought, such as wood pulp. With the development of new techniques for extracting fibers from the trees, the price of paper fell dramatically, and paper soon became a product of mass consumption. In Britain alone, paper production increased from 96,000 tons a year in 1861 to 648,000 tons in 1900. With the spread of cheap paper, books, leaflets, newspapers, and all manner of communication became accessible to all, leading to an expansion of literacy among the middle classes. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, paper began to be made for even more things, such as toilet and wrapping paper, toys, interior decoration, and a vast amount of things that we hardly think about. By the last decades of the 20th century, the environmental impact of paper and its production began to be scrutinized as awareness of humans' effect on their world grew. Paper manufacturing uses significant amounts of natural resources, between 2 and 2.5 tons of timber, and 30 to 40 cubic meters of water are required to make 1 ton of paper. Electricity and methane gas are needed to power the machines used in the various production phases, and, depending on the type of paper, a host of polluting chemical additives is also used. With this awareness, people now try whenever possible to choose sustainable or recycled paper to reduce environmental impact. Besides using recycled materials, sourcing paper from responsibly managed forests, and implementing eco-friendly production methods, many companies now use soy-based inks and chlorine-free bleaching processes. Until a few decades ago, the dissemination of any idea required a sheet of paper. Today, however, digital media has perhaps obscured the fundamental role that paper has played in spreading knowledge. The digital age has profoundly transformed paper consumption, a reduced need for paper for things such as printing, publishing, and correspondence. E-books and digital magazines have mostly replaced the demand for physical books and periodicals. In response to demand, the print industry has shifted its focus towards high-quality, niche products such as luxury packaging, artisanal stationery, and bespoke printing services for unique, limited editions. Despite the shift towards digital media, paper remains vital in many ways. In education, for example, textbooks, workbooks, and exam papers are still widely used. Legal and healthcare sectors also continue to use paper for documentation and record keeping, for reliability and security. Additionally, paper's tactile qualities and durability make it irreplaceable for certain applications, such as archival documents and fine art prints, not to mention everyday items of consumption in everything from personal journals to baby nappies and housing insulation. My friend, it was so good to have you here in the study to share this paper story with me. While we played with paper on this lazy summer day, when the flowers are all blooming and the bees are buzzing and the breeze can be heard in the tree leaves. I wish you a beautiful, beautiful dreams, peaceful sleep. Be good to yourself, be kind to others, and